Hi folks, Tim Newman with Soft Light Studios, and it's Friday. And you know what that means? It's time for a drink. No, just kidding. Really, you can see it right down there. It's time for Living with Lightroom, which is what we do on Fridays. If you recall, the last time I came to you on a Friday, it was from Lofoten, Norway, and I was looking a lot scruffier than I am right now. No, we were going over Lightroom's Crop Tool. And we had just gone through the introductory part of the Crop Tool where we talked about the culling process and quickly jumping from deciding we're going to keep an image to going over to the Develop module to the Crop Tool and deciding what our final composition was going to be. And you might remember that I said for me, that was a critical part of my workflow because what I wanted to do was get down to the final composition as quickly as I could so that the histogram reflected the actual pixels that were going to stay in that image and that my global edits, which should always be done against the histogram, were going to be accurate and be within bounds of that histogram, which is very important, especially when you're thinking about the printing process. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to continue on with the Crop Tool and we're going to explore some of the additional features that are there. And to do that, we're going to take a look at a Lightroom catalog that I put together for us and a folder that's in there. So, last time we were together, we were starting our exploration of the Crop Tool in Lightroom. And I let you in on a little one of my workflow secrets, and that's the R shortcut key, which will take whatever image you're currently pointing to, take it to the Develop module, display it in Loop View mode, open up the Crop Tool panel, and have the crop overlay sitting on top of the image ready to go. But more than that, it does it no matter what module you're in Lightroom. If I happen to be over here working in a book module, putting together a book, and I decide, wow, I don't like the crop of that image, I select it, hit the R key, and bang, here I am in the Develop module, Crop Tool opened over here on the right, ready to go, crop overlay on top of the image, ready to do its thing. It's one of those shortcut keys that just makes sense to me, speeds up my workflow process no matter where I'm at in Lightroom, and I use it all the time. Remember that R shortcut key is going to become a huge friend of yours. Okay, with that little refresher about the R shortcut key and the Crop Tool out of the way, let's get back over to the Library module and pick an image that we can work on with the Crop Tool to see exactly what this tool can do for us. Now, we can go back to the Library module one of three ways, really. One is to go up here to the menu, click on the word Library, and that will take us back over to the Library module in Loop View mode, like we are right now. We can also do that with the E key. The E key is the shortcut key that will take us back to the Library module at any point we want to go back. But one of my favorite shortcut keys is the G key, which not only takes us back to the Library module, but it takes us back there in grid view mode, which is often the way I want to go back to the Library module. I'm usually going back to the library to pick the next image to work on, so it makes sense to me to go back over here in this grid view mode. I'm just going to scroll down here. This is kind of my reference image here for where I'm at in the catalog. It's not the one I'm actually going to work on, but it kind of gives me an idea of where I want to look for the image that I would like to work with here with the Crop Tool. And it's this image right down here. This is a picture taken near Ground Zero at the World Trade Center in New York. It's a building that just went up there in the last couple of years called the Oculus Building. Gorgeous piece of architecture. I shoot it every time I go there. And I want to hit the R key and go over into the Crop Tool mode and take a look at this image and see what kind of cropping things that we can do with it. So here we are in the Develop module with our selected image being displayed, our Crop Tool overlay open and on top of the image, and we can confirm that the Crop Tool is indeed open by looking over here at the Crop Tool panel, and we can see that in fact it is open with all of its options displayed and ready to go. Now, before we jump in here and begin cropping this image, I would like to point something out that can be a bit of a gotcha, and once you know about it, it's no big deal, but
it's a real subtle thing, and I want to take just a second here to take a lock at it. Over here, you'll notice there's this little icon, which is supposed to look a lot like a brass padlock, and I think it does. If I click on that icon, you will notice that the hasp of that padlock opens up to the left, indicating that it is now unlocked. If we click on it again, you'll notice that the hasp closes up, indicating that this particular feature here is locked again. Heck of an improvement over the previous versions of Lightroom, where that hasp simply moved up and down, and you had to click it a couple times to be sure that you knew whether you were in the locked or unlocked state. So now I'm sure you're asking, well, that's great, Tim, but what exactly is being locked and unlocked? It's the aspect ratio lock. And when this icon is in its locked state, we have locked the aspect ratio of our crop edits that we are about to do, which means that if this image were originally taken in a, say, 3:2 aspect ratio off of a full-frame digital SLR, every single edit that we would do would be in that same 3:2 aspect ratio. Now, that doesn't mean the size is going to be the same. We are, in fact, going to trim off pixels with our edits. But whatever edit we come up with, we'll still have that same 3:2 ratio. So if this image were originally 6,000 pixels by 4,000 pixels, and we were going to edit 50% of it away, we would be down to an image that's then 3,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels, thus still that same aspect ratio. Now, that doesn't mean that that camera can only put out 3:2 files. In fact, if you were to take a lot of the newer contemporary DSLRs that shoot video and decide to do widescreen high definition video, you're probably changing your aspect ratio to 16:9, for example. And with this tool locked, any edits to a 16:9 image would still end up being in that 16:9 aspect ratio. If you want to get to different aspect ratios, custom aspect ratios, 1:1 aspect ratio, for example, i.e. a square image, then simply unlock this icon and you can do whatever aspect ratio you wish. There are some other shortcut keys that go with that, but we'll cover that in the second video in this using the cropping tool part of the series. Okay? Just wanted you to know that. So if you ever get to an image and you're like, yeah, I want to get to a different aspect ratio, you're not frustrated, just come over here and unlock this icon, and then those custom aspect ratios are open and available to you. All right, so let's actually get to doing some crops on this image that we have selected here, and in doing so, learn about this crop overlay that's currently being displayed on top of our image. Now, as you look at this overlay, you'll probably note that it is, in fact, dividing the picture into 3 horizontal rows and 3 vertical columns, with the guides for those rows and columns creating intersecting points in the middle of the frame. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, wow, this looks a lot like a rule of thirds overlay, that's exactly what it is. And this overlay is giving us our 3 columns and 3 rows that we would expect in a rule of thirds composition. And it's also providing us with the intersecting points that theoretically, according to that rule, are the ideal places to locate points of interest in the image as you're going through and doing your crops and your edits. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going into rules of composition and the rule of thirds. That's for another series of videos that we are making available. But I do want to point out that that, in fact, is what this overlay is. And also, take note real quickly that you may or may not have this rule of thirds overlay displayed like I do. And that's because Lightroom has multiple crop overlays available, and they can be gotten to by pressing the O key. So you see every time I press the O key here, I get to a different overlay. And eventually, if I keep pressing the O key, I will end up cycling through all of the crop overlays and will end up back at this rule of thirds overlay. So no matter where you're at within the collection of crop overlays that are available to you, if you keep pressing the O key, eventually you can make yours look like mine. Now, We're not going to go into all of these different overlays in this video. We have 2 more videos coming up here in this cropping series. We will definitely cover them there, but I just want to point out, in case your screen doesn't look like mine, easy to get there, and it's not a problem that it doesn't look like mine. You just happen to have a different overlay displayed. Fair enough? All right. So in this overlay, as we navigate around the edges of it, you will notice that there are what we refer to as control handles. And as we go around the outside edge, you will see that there are in fact 8 of these control handles. There are 4 of them that reside in the corners of the image, which allow us to crop on those 2 edges of the image. And then there are the 4 that exist on the edges of the image, which allow us to crop against that edge of the image. So if I come over here to the upper left-hand corner and I hover right over the top of this corner control handle right here, and I click and drag in, you will notice that the outside boundaries of the image are drawn in as I bring that control handle inward, and they are drawn in a way that we are proportionally removing pixels from the edge of this image so that we're maintaining the same aspect ratio of this image. And if I decide to move this back out, I can go back to where I started with the image, and now I'm seeing the image in its entirety. But any edit that I'm doing here with any of these corners will bring in the 2 edges that are connected to that control handle, and again in that proportionate amount. Now if I go to a edge handle, remember I have them on the long edges and the short edges, and I grab and drag that in or out, you'll notice that I get essentially the same behavior. I am cropping the image inward, but as Lightroom does not know where you want to take these pixels off of the opposing short edges, it just splits the amount between the 2 sides and makes it uniform on both of the opposing edges of the image. Now, if that is not what you had intended, easy enough to take this and move this around and place the image where you want it in the frame. If I say, well, I really want all of this portion over here, I can indeed bring the edge in and then adjust from there without any problem. So a lot of different features available there in the control handles, the ability to come in from any of the 4 edges, any of the 4 corners, the ability to drag the crop in and out, and the ability to drag the image within the new crop overlay frame that's been built for us. Now I have a couple of choices. Let's say that I'm happy with my crop here the way it is. I can, and don't do this yet, just hang on 1 second. I can hit enter and that crop will indeed be done for me, and Lightroom will record that crop and reformat the image that way. Or if I've done a whole bunch of stuff to the image and I'm like, I'm not really sure that I'm sold on this, I can just hit the escape key and it will undo all of those uncommitted crops and put it back the way it is. One of the cool things that Lightroom does during that process is, if you look over here in the history panel, you can see that it keeps track of every single look along the way where I had drug a control handle and then stopped. It records that so I can have all of those different crop steps available to me. And over here in the navigator window, you can actually see them scrolling through as we're taking a look at all the ones in the list. If you decide that you don't need that list, pardon me, and you really want to go back to the image the way it was, you can simply click on the Clear All X here next to the History Control panel, and all of those various crops will indeed be dumped out of the history stack and you'll be back to the way the image started originally. As you have probably noted, hitting the escape key to undo the crops that I was working on takes me out of the crop tool mode altogether. It's as simple as pressing the R shortcut key again to take me back into the crop tool mode so I can continue working on crops for this image. Now I want to point out a couple of the unique behaviors that the crop tool overlay displays here while we're working on it, so you're not surprised by them the first time you run into them. One of them is, let's say I come up here to this upper right hand corner of the image, I start dragging in with the corner, trimming off pixels on both the top and the right edges, and instead of continuing to move down at an angle, I move more left and right. And at some point along the way here, you will notice that all of a sudden The crop changes orientations. That's correct. We have just gone from having a landscape image to having a portrait image if we indeed follow through with this crop and keep it this way. You'll notice that once I get into that mode, I can use the handles in that portrait orientation. By the way, still maintaining aspect ratio all the way through this process. And I can redistribute the image within the frame here as well, just by dragging inside the frame and placing the image underneath that crop overlay where I want it to be. If I decide, oops, I didn't really want to go that way, I can grab that control handle and start dragging more to the right than to the left, and I will end up back in the landscape crop overlay. And some of the times when you're working on one of these crop overlays and you've been dragging it around a little bit, you'll notice that you can get all the way to one side with the crop, and then you're like, wow, I can't get back to the entire image that I had before. Just go grab the opposing handle and drag it out to the edges, and there you go. You can bring it back to full size in the image. While we're out here at full size, one of the other things I want to point out here is this notion of rotating the image in the crop. And you notice if I hover the mouse over the corner, I get this kind of cross-shaped icon. If I go a little outside the corner, you'll notice that all of a sudden it changes to a bent handle icon, if you will. It's very subtle, small, and not so easy to see, but I know that going just outside of that control handle gives me that, and if I click and drag while I'm in that kind of bent icon mode, I'm actually able to now rotate the image. And you notice as soon as you begin to rotate the image, you get this really nice grid overlay. And the grid overlay is super helpful in rotating crops because it essentially is giving you a number of repetitive horizontal and vertical lines against which you can frame up elements in the image. In fact, as I look at this, I have rotated this crop and I've got this aspect of the image anchored now in this corner, and I've kind of got a stronger diagonal line, if you will, across the frame. So I kind of like that crop the way it is, and in this particular case I'm going to hit enter and commit to that crop. And again, looking over here in the history control panel, you can see that it's even noting the crop angle for us. So we have all of that information over here, all of the different steps that we've gone through in playing with the crop tool here in this second round. And I've got an image now that I'm really happy with the orientation of the image. I think it's a much stronger diagonal line in the frame, and I think that's where I'm going to stop for now with this image. We're going to come back in the next part of this series exploring some additional features in the crop overlay tool and beginning to work through a number of the attributes and features that are available in the crop tool panel. But for now, that gives us a good idea of how to just perform basic crops to images in Lightroom, and I think it's a really good starting place.
Here, and I'll talk to you guys for a few more seconds before we sign off in this tutorial. The crop tool does a lot more than what we've just seen here today, but even what we've just seen here today offers you a ton of power in getting the image to look the way you want it to look and getting that histogram updated so you can move on to your next editing steps. Certainly appreciate you tuning back in. Hopefully now that we're back home from trucking all over Europe, we can get back on a regular schedule and we'll have stuff coming at you every day. Remember, click on that little subscribe button down there somewhere on the little bell so you get updates when new tutorials come out. Thanks for joining us. Hope you got something out of it. And remember, as we always say, knowledge equals skills, practice equals mastery. We'll see you out there.